This is Jill Lancis with College Web Media. Here's my interview with Brendan Gleeson, Kelly Reilly, and writer-director John Michael McDonagh talking about their new film, Calvary. Hope you enjoy.
This interview is brought to you by Vantages. That's Vantages.us. As a small business owner, you need sound business advice and guidance on the best strategies for your company's success. Whether it's a business startup or help is needed in growing your company, Vantages can help.
So approaching a topic like this that's so hard-hitting, and were there things that you guys discussed beforehand about how you would address some of these issues or not, or was it just sort of...
In terms of writing, I don't really think about the ramifications of what I've written. And I think the actors should just play the characters, not play the themes.
No, not really. I grew up in Ireland, see. So the whole scenario was immediately familiar. And, you know, we had chatted about, I guess, how difficult it must be for a man to maintain his sense of commitment to the cloth when there's been such heinous things committed and covered up and things like that. So it's not that we were blind to the issues, but as it emerged, you know, the script was very, very dense. There were so many paths you could follow. I remember being absolutely exhausted at the end of the reading when all the different actors came in. Everybody had brought something to it, so there's an intensity in it. But every stage grew into itself. So it wasn't something that you said, okay, we'll do this and we'll do that. Everything was, you know, we had preparation, but ultimately we were allowed, you know, and it was kind of a testament to John's leadership as well and his collaborative methods that we found things in scene. Every time we went into something, we found new stuff.
Well, I think my character, Fiona, she's luckily, I think, she's not part of this community, so she walks into it with a different energy. She doesn't really even know the world that he lives in and exists, and these people in this community. I mean, I think she says after Veronica in the cafe, she says, you have to put up with this shit on a regular basis. I mean, quite frankly, I think she'd have taken her out, you know. It's like, and actually in one version of the scene she did, and it got cut. Because,
right.
do you remember? There was a slap.
Yeah,
she said something quite provocative to him, and she took it upon herself to say, excuse me, you know he can't respond, but I certainly can, and I love that about her, but I don't know why it didn't make the cut, but whatever.
The big emotional scenes between Brendan and Kelly's character, they're not to do with any of the scandals or anything. They're to do with personal issues, and that, you know, they're the most moving sequences in the movie.
What brought each of you to the project?
Well, the initial idea was just to tell a story about a genuinely good person and not be ironic. So that was the initial discussion, and it just grew from there.
Yeah, and my fascination as a character thing was that, imagine being a good man. There had been, when we were chatting about it in the early stages, there had been a priest of, you know, two priests that we knew of accused of pedophilia in the wrong, I said, God Almighty, imagine having, you know, to commit your life to something that is positive and then to be besmirched with this thing. I mean, you never recover from that kind of an accusation. You're the way people think of you, you know, is shattered forever. There's always somebody going to think there's no smoke without fire. And how do you maintain faith or anything in that regard? So that's where I came to it from.
Well, this film is obviously a lot darker than The Guard, but like The Guard, there were a lot of very funny moments in it, and a lot of very funny lines. Was it difficult to sort of balance the humor in the situation? And
as I said, I don't think too much about it when I'm writing. I write very quickly. Over and done with as quickly as possible, because it's a very boring career sitting in a room alone for 3 or 4 hours every day. So I like to sit down and just churn it out in the space of 3 weeks if I can. I only start thinking about those kinds of, let's say, tonal balance in the editing suite. And so it'd be a case of, okay, I've just realised there are 3 incredibly dark scenes in a row. Maybe we should shift them around and have some light relief in between. And there is a sort of episodic nature to the script and the movie that I knew that in the writing I could shift that without compromising the narrative flow, really. I could move scenes around. How you play it, I guess, I assume the actors play the character rather than the tonal shifts.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's an aspect anyway. Certainly at home, it's a big thing, you know. There's great hilarity at funerals and things like that, and it's a very cathartic way of actually releasing a little bit of tension out of something. I mean, the relationship between myself and Kelly's, you know, between Fiona and Lavelle, they share a kind of a soulmate ship that has been fractured and has lost its way, and one of the things they do is make each other laugh.
It's a banter.
There's a banter, yeah, and it's kind of, you know, the little curl at the end of the mouth.
Yeah, and it reveals how well they actually know one another and how similar they are.
They're very erudite people.
Yeah. And I think it's a useful tool to relieve some of the pressure of any discomfort.
Yeah, I mean, they're in a trauma, really, aren't they?
Yeah,
you know, and it's kind of, and so that happens a lot, and a lot of people say very hurtful things through humour in this piece too, and they manage to get, you know, funny, ha-ha, funny, actually half whatever it is, half funny, half serious, or totally serious, whatever the phrase is. The tenderness can be facilitated through humour, so it becomes integral. I certainly don't split them up. You know what I mean?
Speaking of tone, I mean, the first scene of the movie does basically set the tone for the entire film. I'm wondering where that idea came from. Did you always know that that's how you wanted to start it?
I always knew the opening line was the opening line. I like pre-credit sequences, so that's my version of a Michael Bay pre-credit sequence.
It doesn't cost as much.
No, it's just one actor. So you're trying to, write a sort of shocking opening that will hopefully nail people to their seats and they'll want to know what the conclusion is. You're basically telling the audience, you know, you're not going to get the guard too if that's what you're expecting, and you're telling them in the opening line. I mean, when we showed it at Sundance, there would still be laughs at the opening line, and then people will go, oh God, it's going to get serious. But then it gets funny again. People are completely wrong-footed right from the opening scene, so you're setting the tone for that entire movie right there in the first piece.
How do you mapping out representing the priest that can be need to stand in a common ground at the same time as can be judgmental?
Well, I think we had specifically the scene where he goes to the rich man's house, Fitzgerald. I think that was originally written as quite a confrontational scene. Brendan said, you know, he's still trying to help the guy and save him, so I don't think he would react as confrontationally as you've written it. So I think we finessed the dialogue a little bit there and dealt with it in that way. I mean, the priest, he's a good man, but he's very acerbic, and he's prepared to sarcastically put down people who are threatening him or verbally trying to abuse him. So he's not like, he's not a weak character, he's not a naive character, he's, you know, he's the direct opposite of the other priest, who's basically a pointless priest, you know.
I think there's a case there where a death threat focuses the mind. And I think he was that way anyway, but, you know, he's lived a life where he doesn't sweat the small stuff. And there are a lot of things that actually I'd be asking John, I'm not sure if you could actually sanction that, like where he's talking to you saying, have you used porn? Rather than actually killing people and, or, you know, committing suicide. Well, sex and death, what can I say? It's a little death, isn't it? So, yeah, well, I do think that he doesn't sweat, that he, no, you know, I'd say to John, I'm not sure if he would actually put that out there, you know.
I liked it because he wasn't always a priest, and he came into the priesthood later. He was a red-blooded man who has a child who's been married, and that's what makes him so extraordinary.
Exactly, and it gives him, I think, John opened the door there for this, that he wasn't a naive seminarian who knew nothing else, only prayers. He was somebody who had experience of life, so he didn't sweat the small stuff. Whether that's acceptable within the Catholic Church or not, I'm not that sure. So, and there was a kind of a dialogue that was going on, so I understand your question. But I think actually what's been interesting is for people who are Catholic, they kind of wish priests could be a bit more like that.
Has clergy or groups of clergy had a chance to see this, and had they responded in any kind of way that you'd like to share about?
As far as I'm aware, there's been no official response to it. We have got a lot of very positive reviews, though, in Christian like magazines and newspapers and stuff like that. So I think it's been appreciated as a sincere sort of question in film. Anecdotally, one of the actors who plays the policeman who has the sort of gay hustler in his house, he went to mass, and the local priest recognised him and shook hands with him and said, "Oh, I really enjoyed your movie." And then in the sermon at mass, he encouraged everyone to go and see it.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, that's individuals, isn't it? You know, we think about the church. Well, the church is just a hierarchical organisation, but it's made up of human beings.
Yeah.
So that all their responses are going to be different.
There seems to be a moment in the film when Brendan, there seems to be a moment in the film where you go from that you have your epiphany, I suppose, of what you're going to do. You get the gun. It seems like it's self-defense, like you're taking on this person, but you want to live. But then there's a moment, and it seems like it's almost an instantaneous moment where you decide that you're going to not, or I'm not sure why you got rid of the gun if you weren't. So I'm just not sure why you got rid of the gun, if you want to explain that.
Yeah, maybe it's different in Ireland and America. I think there's been too many guns. I don't think it's who he is. I think, you know, we've looked at that issue of self-defense with Milo about the whole notion of joining an army in peacetime and everything. And I think just it's anathema to who he is. It's not what he's doing. He absorbs the pain of others. He doesn't deliver it, you know. And so, you know, there is a tipping between the notion of his responsibility, for example, to Fiona, by going down and putting his life in danger in that way. How is that yet another betrayal? You know, is there any death wish? I never felt a death wish. I always felt he was trying to put an end to that despair and absorb the pain if necessary and death if necessary. But that's where his strength was, not in aggressively fighting back with hate or with violence, but to absorb it.
Yeah, I mean, he has the moment of weakness where he gets the gun early on.
Yeah.
And that's kind of bargaining with his own life. But obviously the question of self-defense is a tricky one, and I mean, most of us would probably defend ourselves, but obviously he comes to the conclusion at the end that he shouldn't do that. You should always remember, just soon after he throws the gun away, he has the meeting with Dylan Moran's character, and he says, you know, I'll speak to you later. So he's still hoping, he's not expecting to be killed, he's still hoping he'll be around.
Well, that was my question. Do you think he's going there thinking that he can still save this guy?
Oh, totally. I think that's totally it. He keeps saying it's not too late. It's not, even after he's shot the first time. He's saying he's still saying he's not going to look away. He's going to present himself there, you know. And it is, in a way, you know, I didn't feel Christ-like moving through this film at all, even though it's Calvary, that's where he was crucified. But on the beach there was a certain amount of hanging tough and saying, no, it's still there if you want it. There is still hope, you know. And that's what's so beautiful about the end scene with Fiona. And it's such an exhilarating thing to have a film that actually commits itself to forgiveness and hope, possibly.
And he says I mean, the character we eventually is revealed as going to be the killer. He has the scene on the beach with his wife where he says no one is a lost cause. So he's going down there to try to save the man, not to expect to be killed.
When did you first become aware of this issue in the church, and how did it make you feel?
I feel like I've always known about it all my life.
So
it feels like it's been something that, as long as I was an adult, thinking adult, it was around and talked about, and
it's been the last 20 years at least.
Nay, more than that.
Yeah.
It's
I
been
know
around a long
specifically
time.
my father, who was a lifelong churchgoer, when all the scandals started coming up in the last 20, 15 years. I mean, he's 76 now, he hasn't gone to Mass in the last 5 to 10 years, as there's a fallout from it. So people like that, they feel their entire lives have been betrayed, really. Whereas younger people, I think, are obviously a lot more cynical about it, because they've grown up with one scandal after another.
Can you talk a bit about the locations and for photographing it, and how the bleak atmosphere kind of underscored, I think, some of the themes of the film?
Yeah, it's all shot in a town called Eastkey in County Sligo, where my mother's from, and I used to spend summer holidays there. You can probably hear from my accent, I'm not actually Irish, I'm from South London, so I used to go on summer holidays. I mean, all those shots, you know, you can, in the script you say a few shots of the town, a few shots of the landscape, and then, you know, that's down to Larry Smith with all that cinematography, and the symbolic aspect of waves crashing onto a cliff face is something that comes up, you realise after you've shot it. I don't think I had it in my mind when I was doing it. All the great helicopter shots over the landscape, I mean, that looks amazing now, but that was all done in 25 minutes. We had a great caterer, and I wanted to get back for lunch, so I tried to...
Lunch was the main objective of every day.
The caterer was the second person hired after Brendan, actually. He was the same caterer on the guard. I was like, we've got to get that guy back, so secure him. But yeah, that was so all that. And that when I got the, an edit of that sequence back, I thought this is amazing. It's going to make the film feel bigger right at the very start, because I didn't want to make a film that felt like a parochial small Irish movie, and it just does expand the whole film and it turns it into something mythic. I think
But there's also the kind of the commitment. Like in a way, John is saying I remember he came back slightly dizzy. It didn't stop him being first in the queue for the catering, but he was slightly dizzy about what they'd actually achieved up there. But there was, it's a small, very tight schedule, and it takes a particular sort of sense of leadership and courage to be able to say, no, we actually are travelling to Sligo. We're going to take a day out of the schedule to get there and a day out of there, to rejig in a very tight schedule. It's difficult. All the Black Cliffs were part of his plan. He knew where all that stuff was, and he was very into, the split rock. All of these things were massively part of the plan.
Where Dylan and Brendan have their conversation is where they used to drop unwanted pets into the waves to get rid of them.
Yeah, we were talking in the dog's hole.
Yeah, dog's hole it was
That's what we used to call it. But so that was all, it was all very much there when we read the thing, but then to go there was, I think John mentioned before, they're talking about Ben Bulben, which is the massive big rock. There are elements of Monument Valley about that, and the feeling that Ben Bulben doesn't care, As somebody said to me one time when I bought a chainsaw, it doesn't care if it's a leg or a tree. And there's something about this thing, about this landscape, we're huge and we're tiny in equal measure.
Well, while you were shooting, Kelly, were you still doing Black Box at the time, or was time off, or what?
No, I didn't start Black Box until last October, and this was shot. When did we shoot this?
It was
Previous October.
Previous October, yeah. So it was a year before entirely, yeah.
I love Black Box.
Could you talk about the dialogue with the serial killer? I thought that was a very controversial issue, and this film doesn't shy away from any of those topics.
It was actually loosely based on an interview I'd seen with an actual serial killer, where he was clearly insane. He was a paedophile murderer, and he couldn't understand why he wasn't allowed to kill children. So he was saying things that are appalling, but they were kind of comically funny in the sense that he has no recognition of his own insanity. So I kind of got that element from there, and then obviously elaborated on it myself. Talking about shifting scenes around, initially in the script, Kelly's scene with Brendan in the confessional, which is all about suicide, was right next to the scene with Donald Gleeson, which is obviously a very dark philosophical scene as well. That felt like, once you got into the editing suite, it felt like two confessional scenes back to back. So that I shifted them away from each other, and then moved a lighter scene, if you can call any scene in the film lighter, in between or whatever. But yeah, it's deliberately placed right in the middle of the film to be the sort of the dark heart of the movie, really. And what was interesting about the way it all played and the way Donald played it is, you're never quite sure, does he want to be forgiven or not? Is it all a put on or not? And we're not quite sure, and that's up for us to decide ourselves, I suppose.
Why did you leave it a mystery? What happened with the dog?
I like those things in a movie where there's one thing that isn't explained. Although it is explained in the film, there is a clue in the film.
Could you add your comment?
It was just to talk about the serial killer. You remember at the very end of the film where there's that beautiful sort of moving montage of all the characters, which I think is just so beautiful. That character is sobbing, and in like the pit of despair is like, and for like the way that the way that you can have sympathy for a serial killer is what makes this film very important.
Also, a reading of the ending is that Chris O'Dowd's character, who has obviously been a victim of abuse, is now in prison with abusers, because they're wearing the same jumpsuit, so you're assuming he's in the same prison as Donald Gleeson.
Yeah, one of the great things, that kind of, when you're talking, I kind of put a lot of emphasis when I was talking about this film, about the sense of hope at the end, because it really does strike me. But one of the other things, in equal measure, I think, that you get from the film is, from Chris O'Dowd's performance, is the knowledge that I remember seeing deliverance and understanding what rape meant, finally, because you see see it happening in such a way. In this film, you understand that child sex abuse is a lifetime sentence, you know, and in that scene on the beach, I still at that point felt that this man was as much victim, and you know, and that the notion of, like, there was no feeling of he's the killer, he's the villain. It was, all of that had gone. There was this much more disturbing vista of somebody who had lived his life in pain.
I was wondering, for John, was there always the inevitability that he would pull the trigger for you when you were conceiving the story?
Yeah, he was always going to die. I didn't know until I was 2/3 way through which of the characters was going to be the killer, though. It's interesting that the scene right at the end, in the original draft of that, when Kelly's character is kind of visually trying to encourage him to pick up the phone, in the original draft he doesn't pick up the phone. But I thought, you know, at this moment we've gone through this journey, let's have elements of grace in both characters. So he picks up the phone, and then we have, you know, we end on the great final shot of Kelly. This is me going, don't do the nihilistic ending, do something, have a modicum of hope at the end.
You reveal yourself slightly.
Yes, you
Let me
do.
tell you, for your black soul, there's hope.
Talk about the development of some of these characters, and also how you guys must have felt very familiar. I mean, certainly Sligo does prompt that kind of. I've been in Sligo, so I know how it can do.
Well, I mean, I'm a big fan of Preston Sturges' screwball comedies, which had lots of fast-talking supporting cast. I'm a big fan of working with actors again and again as well, repertory companies. So I tried, you know, there's people in the film like Pat Short, Gary Lydon, who are in the Guard. I actually found all those characters quite easy to write in a way, because they're all confrontational towards the priest, you know. But what I tried to develop was that I tried to have, there has to be something deeper about them. So the rich man appears to be a completely appalling person who has no feelings for about anything, but it actually turns out at the end he's the only one who asks for help. He does genuinely go and ask for help. Aidan Gillen's, you know, smirking atheistic doctor, I mean, you know, yeah, he's an appalling person, but he is helping his community out. He is a doctor, he is saving lives, so there's not one reading. I'm trying to have, you know, subtler readings to each character, and I think that's what appeals to actors, obviously, because they may only have, you know, 2 or 3 scenes, but they're actually quite meaty scenes, and there's a lot going on with their characters in it.
Did you guys know people who are not unlike a few of these characters that you could talk about?
Aidan Gillen is a smirking atheist character. The bishop is played by Dave McSavage, who's a quite confrontational Irish comedian. He has his own show called The Savage Eye. Pat Short is probably the wealthiest man in Ireland, or he doesn't like to talk about it. He's just doing my brother's play, The Cripple of Inishmaan. He's in that. He's a very popular comedic actor. I mean, a lot of those supporting actors are known for comedy. I just like working with those sorts of people. There's a slightly different energy about them, I guess. I always find them quite committed.
So you looked for the eccentricities of your cast,
yes,
to inform the eccentricities
just to help the weakness of the writing. I cast oddballs.
Find out what your...
Those characters had a conflict with the church, and did you just like put all your conflicts of what you think of into a hat and say, okay, pull them out?
Well, in a way, you're like, there's usually a rich man in town, so okay, he's a rich man, maybe he's one of the guys who were responsible for the financial crash, but he got away with it. So you go, okay, I've got a character that I can play around with, but is also subtextually dealing with all those kinds of elements as well. So that is a kind of way, yeah, the way you structure the script that goes along.
So not the 7 deadly sins?
No, it's loosely based around the 5 stages of grief.
Oh.
So it's denial, bargaining is when he goes to get the gun, anger, depression is his lowest point in the bar and everything, and then acceptance.
What was the intention behind not following up on Jack's character as being raped as a child, rather just following up on the priest itself?
Because that's a whole other movie. I think you can make you could probably, I mean, I always feel I'm trying to make the characters rich enough that you could follow each character off into their own film, in a way. Yeah, I mean, you could tell Jack's story. That would be a film in itself. But to deal with those issues, to me, to do it properly and to face it head on, which is the only way I'd want to do it. I mean, you're basically making a horror film, as far as I'm concerned. Which is fine, I just don't want to make a horror film. I wanted to deal with all those subjects a bit more obliquely, really.
Do you view the protagonist as a Christ figure beyond just some of the surface similarities?
I guess he becomes one in the end, but that wasn't my intention sort of starting out. Anyone, I guess, takes on a burden of suffering and doesn't react violently to it becomes a Christ-like figure.
How did you decide on those particular actors?
Well, obviously Brendan I'd worked with before. Kelly I'd seen in a movie that isn't widely known called Eden Lake. Talking about horror movies, because this is probably one of the best performed horror movies I've seen. It was Kelly and Michael Fassbender. I'm not sure how widely released it was over there. The director was it James Marsh? Who then went on to do Woman in Black, which obviously became a big hit. So I think this was his first movie. So I've seen Kelly in that. And then I think just one night I was watching, is it Above Suspicion or Under Suspicion?
Above.
With Kelly and Kieran Hines, and I thought, oh, I've always liked Kelly, and she's got red hair. So she could play Brendan's daughter. That
was my one quality.
That was it.
Ginger stick together, see?
What happened to it?
Oh, I'm just hiding for a while. I'll come back.
But I also had in my mind, for some reason, that I wanted Kelly to wear the green coat that she wears, because I wanted to make a visual reference to Antonioni's Red Desert. Because I thought if people compared Kelly to Monica Vitti, they'd compare me to Antonioni.
That's a lot to put on my shoulders.
Marie-José?
Marie-José Croze, I'd just seen in lots of... She's a French-Canadian actress, just seen in lots and lots of films. She'd been in Diving Bell and the Butterfly and Tell No One. And it was, you know, I do watch a lot of movies, and I like to have sort of unexpected people to show up, you know, like M. Emmett Walsh. Suddenly he's, you know, he's in some island off the coast of Sligo. A lot of the Irish actors I knew, you know, I was making a joke about Aidan Gillen, but I've known him for almost 20 years. Chris, I didn't know that well. I saw him be very funny but also abusive at an award ceremony where he was a host. And I thought, oh, I'd like to work with a guy like that. That might be interesting. Orla O'Rourke, who plays Veronica, was complete unknown to me, really. But I've always been really lucky with casting.
How about the altar boy?
The altar boy, well, that's Michal. He was in the Guard as well. I mean, I just love the fact he's kind of got the face of a 65-year-old man, really. He actually, he was a lovely kid on the Guard, and he got really cocky, didn't he, when he showed up in Calvary? Yeah, he was sort of slapping Larry Smith, the cinematographer, on the back, and giving Brendan line readings.
He was doing that in the Guard.
Yeah.
I always find it bold and courageous when you use these black characters.
Yeah, well, Isaac, again, you know, I love Isaac de Bankelet from Jim Jarmusch movies. I just want to get away, you know, there is a view, but I don't know what, I think possibly in America where Islanders seem to be, you know, a country populated by lots of white-haired ginger people. And I just wanted it, because it's not like that, and so I just wanted to get away with that, get away from that sort of image.
It's not devoid of them either.
It's not devoid of them, no. Again, and you know, I want an easy life. I like to cast actors who I think are probably quite decent people and who drink a lot. And Kelly fit that reason.
You didn't know that.
I didn't know that at the time. I sensed something.
What was it like shooting with your son in those scenes and stuff? Was it the first time they'd worked together?
No, we had worked together before, and we'd done a couple of things. We were in the Harry Potter thing just very briefly. He announced my death, I think, which was a dream come true for him. And we had done a short with John's brother Martin, Six Shooter, which kind of won the Oscar, actually. So
that was a low ebb in my life.
Yes, I know. That was one that spurred all this kind of creative genius in John. And so it was very odd to answer your question. It was we chatted about it, you know, and we were both huge admirers of John's work and all that. And but it began to emerge. We did the reading. We had a brief chat about it. There was a little, you know, I could find a little sundering of the perception and the vision of what was happening, and in the way that he was going to be. You know, he was accessing a lot of stuff that was based in reality. So he was looking for his own, you know, research base and things like that. And we found that we weren't really helping each other. And so for about a week we didn't really speak. So we kind of went to our you know, different corners in the ring. And then we came in and we just duked it out, and it was a very almost confessional thing. John was saying that he set up, you know, this table in the very centre of a huge cell, or a huge holding area, or whatever it was in the jail, and it was compromising and not really. You know, the thought of it was a little bit. I knew I no longer had that particular son for that particular time, but I was in a rage about what I felt was his, you know, blasé attitude, his superficial kind of entertaining of this thing, that he wasn't sincere in his search for redemption or forgiveness, that he didn't really give a damn about the people that he had destroyed and the lives and all that kind of stuff. And I was enraged by it. And so we didn't really talk very much at the beginning. And Donald, for himself, he said afterwards that it was the first time he saw me really kind of in a bit of a, you know, a state, in a kind of, and he was determined to come back at me. And one of the things I was, you know, really proud of him afterwards was that for everything I slammed at him, I got it right back in the face, you know. And so it was fantastic. And I know John was worried a little that it would take people out of the movie, but even people who knew his work didn't recognize him in it. And you know, that was the main thing, that you don't want to be compromising the film by saying, oh, that's his son, you know. A lot of people afterwards are asking me, who did Donald play, you know. And so good, it was proper actor to actor, which was a great bonus.
It was also the one day my brother Martin turned up, and he hadn't read the script, and so he's watching on the monitor as the opening dialogue plays, and he turned to me and said, I thought this was supposed to be a comedy. Which is the way I was promoting it at the time.
Well, you mentioned that you don't like writing. I'm wondering, you know, A, what you do to get through it, and if you had like any advice for somebody else, like for someone who wanted to go into writing. Does it need to be a calling, do you think?
A calling, I don't, possibly. I think you need to have read quite a lot of novels to be a good writer yourself. I never suffer writer's block, because I'm not going to sit there with nothing to do. I mean, you can go to the pub, you know, you don't have to sit in a room. I always have about the first 20 minutes and the last 20 minutes in my head, so I know virtually the first act, and I know where I'm heading in the last act. So it's more or less working out that middle section for me. So I never sit down. I would usually write one day, next day look at what I've written, think about it, write the next day. If I go to sit down and I have no ideas, I just get back up again and do something else. I'm not that kind of, it's just not like this heavy going sort of career where you have to sit there and brood all the time. I don't feel that way at all. You know, listening to music, watching other great films give you ideas. Sometimes you can watch, I always find sometimes you can watch a bad film and it might have one really good scene that wasn't explored properly, and you can get something out of that. And so that's the way I approach it. A calling, I don't think of it in that way. I mean, I just knew I could never do a 9-to-5 job. And I wanted a job where you could get up at like 12:30 in the afternoon and you didn't have to say yes sir to anybody. So that was why I became a writer, basically.
This being part 2 of the trilogy, I'm just wondering, like, do you have any plans for, like, do you know, Brendan, like, what's going to happen in the...
Well, just going back to having scripts in your head, I've got the beginning and the end to the third one we're planning. Hopefully I'll write it next year, and it's going to be about a spectacularly abusive paraplegic. So Brendan will be in a wheelchair in South London going around. He hates anyone who's able-bodied. So he basically hates the entirety of society, which I guess that comes from me. And it'll be a kind of, you know, a dark comedy, and it will have a kind of crime element to it, because he tries to get his life in order by solving the murder of one of his disabled friends, because he believes the police aren't investigating it properly because the guy was disabled. So that's the overall sort of thing, and I'll probably sit down to do that in the first quarter of next year. And it's called The Lame Shall Enter First, which I stole from a Flannery O'Connor short.
And have you been preparing for this?
Yeah, he's been sitting around a lot.
Well, I like to believe that I have fantastic reservoirs of bile that I can kind of tap into easily enough. So crashing about into things and not being able to get access to things should hone it beautifully.
And will Kelly get her opportunity to bash about as well?
I've been thinking about Kelly as playing a psychiatrist. She's the man who's trying to get the guy's life back on track and failing.
Flip side, since you were the psychiatrist.
Yes. So hopefully it will have those kind of confessional sort of element to it. Yeah.
That's it now. You're committed. I'm
There you
afraid.
have to. Now you have to do it.
I will hold you to it.
Right.
So neurologists are black box.
Yeah.
Are there other things you guys have underway, especially your television career has been happening? Can you talk
Well, it just had its finale last night, Black Box, which you've mentioned. I'm very proud of, and we'll see if that's going to get picked up. But I don't think it is. We didn't get the ratings, but it's a difficult time to get ratings in this country. But you know what? In a way, it's like I can put that to bed. It's not official. I don't actually know. They could turn around tomorrow and say it is. But and then I just played Caitlin Thomas in a film about Dylan Thomas. It's his 50th anniversary of his death. He died on the streets of New York. It's a very small little independent film in England that we shot in Wales. And then I just took the summer off because I need to breathe and enjoy my life.
Good for you. Well, I just finished In the Heart of the Sea, the Ron Howard movie, which was Ben Shaw, which was great. I got to sit around again. It was good. I was the narrator, and they all had to go into flashback and go fighting whales and things like that, and getting thrown into water. So I think that's going to be interesting. I did a Suffragette early in the year, which had a whole plethora of brilliant women actors. Meryl Streep dropped in.
Wonderful.
Yeah, that was really great. Sarah Gavron directed that, and Kerry Mulligan and all Anne-Marie Duff, all these brilliant.
Beautiful.
Helena Bonham Carter, the whole lot.
That's a lot of powerful women.
That was a lot of powerful women. Yeah, it was fantastic. Yeah, I was the CID guy who was going about spying on them. I mean, dream job. So that was that, and I just kind of finished another thing called Trespass Against Us, which is set amongst English travelling people, Roma travellers in the Cotswolds. So that's what's on the cards.
This has been a College Web Media production for College Web Mentor. Copyright 2014. This interview is brought to you by Vantages. That's vantages.us. As a small business owner, you need sound business advice and guidance on the best strategies for your company's success. Whether it's a business startup or help is needed in growing your company, Vantages can help at info@vantages.us.